Ken Klippenstein of the Daily Beast exposed a major story of Trump administration corruption here. $300 million Puerto Rico recovery contract awarded to tiny utility company linked to major Trump donor. A tiny utility company linked to a prominent Trump campaign donor has been awarded the massive contract to help rebuild the crippled island. He says, Puerto Rico has agreed to pay a reported $300 million for the restoration of its power grid to a tiny utility company that is primarily financed by a private equity firm founded and run by a man who contributed large sums of money to President Trump, an investigation conducted by the Daily Beast has found. Whitefish Energy Holdings, which had a reported staff of only 2 full-time employees when Hurricane Maria touched down, appears ill-equipped to handle the daunting task of restoring electricity to Puerto Rico's more than 3 million residents. Much larger utilities are more commonly used following natural disasters on the scale of Hurricane Maria, which devastated the island last month. The private equity firm finances Whitefish HBC Investments, was founded by Joe Colonnetta, who serves as its general partner. Federal Elections Commission data compiled by the Daily Beast shows Colonnetta contributed $20,000 to the Trump Victory PAC during the general election, $2,700 to Trump's primary election campaign, then the maximum amount permitted, $2,700 to Trump's general election campaign, also the maximum, and a total of $30,700 to the Republican National Committee in 2016 alone. Colonetta's wife, Kimberly, is no stranger to Republican politics either. Shortly after Trump's victory, she gave $33,400 to the Republican National Committee, the maximum contribution permitted for party committees in 2016. Joe Colonnetta is not the only Republican connection to the controversial Whitefish contract. On Monday, the Washington Post reported that Whitefish Chief Executive Officer Andy Techmansky is friends with Trump administration Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke. Moreover, Whitefish is located in Zinke's hometown of Whitefish, Montana. So, to sum this story up, you have the absolute disastrous hurricane. Actually, there were 2 hurricanes that ravaged Puerto Rico. And in response to this, you know, the government, the serious people, FEMA, the ones who are supposed to be on top of this and the ones who are supposed to be able to take care of this and get everything up and running quickly in the wake of a disaster like this, well, they sat around and they said, how are we going to get this done? And somebody in Trump's inner circle, probably Ryan Zinke, goes, I know a guy who knows a guy. Yeah, maybe we do that. And then, you know, you have a situation where there were campaign contributions to Trump, to his administration, and the company and the person that did it, the person that was the head of the company that did it, it was a tiny company, a tiny utilities company. Well, what better way to pay back the person who gave you giant campaign contributions than to give them the job in Puerto Rico, even though they only had 2 full-time employees when this started. And so you're giving them the contract. They're ill-equipped. They're ill-equipped as a utility company to handle such a giant job. But hey, you gave the campaign contribution, so you get rewarded. This is exactly what pay-to-play corruption looks like. Remember when Trump nonstop went after Hillary Clinton for her pay-to-play corruption? By the way, accurately, of course she does pay-to-play corruption with the Clinton Foundation and otherwise. But that's exactly what this is. 100% what this is. Otherwise, why would you pick a tiny company that has 2 full-time employees to do a giant job like rebuild Puerto Rico and get their electric grid working? Are you kidding me? And by the way, some people have been wondering, rightly so, including myself. You know, you read the headlines a week after Puerto Rico gets obliterated, 2 weeks after, 3 weeks after. And every time it's like 95% of people in Puerto Rico still don't have power. Fast forward a few weeks, 84% of the country still doesn't have power. And you're going, what on God's green? We're talking about a U.S. territory. And weeks after the hurricane hits, about 80% of the island still doesn't have power. That wouldn't happen, and it didn't happen. In Florida when they get hit by a hurricane, in Texas when they get hit by a hurricane, when they had the massive flooding from Harvey. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. Over 80% don't have power? That is ridiculous. Cuba, the communist island, isolated, shut off from the rest of the world, they recovered significantly faster, and they got hit with a relatively equal amount of damage from the hurricanes. So how is it that the U.S. empire-backed country, the U.S. territory, Puerto Rico, still has 80% of people without power all this time after? Here you go. This is how. Because you have nothing but pay-to-play corruption going on behind the scenes, giving people the contracts that don't deserve the contracts. And by the way, you know what this reminds me of? The war in Iraq. I forget the name of the movie. I think it's in Why We Fight, but... Yeah, I think it's in Why We Fight, but there was war profiteering going on in Iraq as well. So what would happen is, after the war in Iraq, or I should say during the war in Iraq, the Bush administration would give no-bid contracts to go in and do various jobs, whether it's rebuilding Iraqi infrastructure or whether it's setting up U.S. bases. And what would happen is, again, pay-to-play corruption. So whoever gave the campaign contributions, they're the ones who get the contracts, the no-bid contracts. So in other words, government's paying more than they actually have to because they didn't have companies bid to do the job for a more reasonable price. They just said, hey, we're going to pick you to do the job. No bid contract. They always pick the people who did the financial campaign contributions to them. And then lo and behold, what happened? Well, one of the stories was, big story was, there was shitty wiring in U.S. bases, so some people got electrocuted as they took showers. Because you hired a company that wasn't good at doing this shit because of corruption. So, hey, they fucked up the wiring, and some U.S. soldiers died because they got electrocuted in the shower. Wow. Another thing, some of the people that were picked to do stuff when it comes to water, they didn't purify the water correctly, and people got cryptosporidium and other parasites from the water because you hired people to be in charge of that had no business being in charge of that. That's war profiteering. That's what that's called. This is natural disaster profiteering. Going to give a company with 2 full-time employees $300 million to rebuild a place with 3 million people. Well, there you go. That's why fucking 80% of people still don't have power there. This is fucking disgusting because they viewed this as an opportunity to do that. Hey, I'll pay back my donors by letting them do the thing in Puerto Rico. Meanwhile, the people are suffering. They're suffering on a daily basis there. People love to talk about impeachment. They bring up goofy ideas like Russia. No, it's not shit like that which is impeachment worthy. It's Trump violating the emoluments clause, which he did from day one. By the way, Hillary did from day one if she were to have been elected as well. And stuff like this. I mean, this is such obvious corruption, and the consequences are so damning. But this will barely be a blip in the radar in corporate media because they're idiots who can't keep their eye on the ball and focus on real-world problems affecting real-world people. By the way, Ken Klippenstein, he's a friend of the show, and Ken, fantastic job figuring out the details of this story. There's really some incredible work, and it's something that if we had a media that had a brain, this would be the number one story for weeks to come.